listeners. Welcome to the Snowy's Camping Show. You're here again with Ben and Lauren. How you going, Lauren?
Awesome.
Good.
I always say awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah. Not much. Just chilling, getting ready for winter.
Yeah. I think in the last episode you used the word dude 3 times. So we'll see how we go this time.
Sorry.
But it's a little bit more serious. Well, not serious, but a little bit more
boring.
Technical this time. Yeah.
Sorry,
well, you
I
said
say
it's boring.
boring. Yeah.
I quite like it though.
Yeah, because you've written a blog post about this.
Well, yeah, I did. I mean, I researched and put stuff together and it keeps getting modified, but it is based on a common question you get, and you've worked in customer service and this question about or people say my tent's leaking, there's water inside my tent, and usually the first thing we ask them about is condensation, isn't it? Because quite often, I don't know if I'd say 9 times out of 10, but would be more than 50% of the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, it would be.
It's probably actually condensation rather than a tent leaking. So that's what today's episode is about, condensation. And we're not scientists, but there is some physics behind how that kind of occurs and ways you can mitigate it. So what is condensation? And you've said you want me to lead most of this.
Because it's
I mean, it's topic.
It's just not one that really grabs my attention, and sometimes I'm a little bit like, oh, shiny, you know what I mean? And this isn't a shiny topic for me, but I'm still interested in it. Right. I think for me sometimes it also just makes sense, but that's also because my camping background and my experience, this sort of stuff makes sense to me because it's what I've grown up with. Do you know what I mean? But for a lot of people, it's new information. Yeah. So I think, could I just preface this conversation first and foremost by saying, like, just explaining a little bit about what Waterhead ratings are? Because a lot of people, when, you know, if they're having condensation issues in their tent, when you're looking at a Waterhead rating of a tent, which on average I think is around about 3,000 mil Waterhead rating. Yeah,
I guess technically about 1,000 to 1,500 is waterproof. Above that.
Oh, but I mean, what I'm trying to say is a lot of the tents we sell, the average sort of Waterhead rating is around about 3,000 mil on the standard sort of family tents. Yep. And that is essentially the fly of the tent stretched out with a, I believe, 10 centimetre pipe or something held firmly on top of it with increment measurements that they pour water in, and when that taut fabric underneath that direct column of water first starts to bead, that's where they call it Waterhead rating. So that means that 3 litres of water has to be actively sitting on top of that tent fabric in order for that tent fabric to actually then be leaking water. So
yeah, that's pretty much how it is. It's a measure of pressure of water. So there's also other elements about length of exposure to water, and we're actually going to try and do a future episode on that to help people understand it. But yeah, it is basically a measure of, like, you know, soft rain hitting a fly versus really heavy wind-driven rain hitting a fly. That's going to make a difference to how much it performs. Yeah. But if you've got a 3,000 millimeter Waterhead tent on a family camping tent, if that's leaking, then you've probably already got bigger issues than the tent leaking, because the weather's going to be so bad that the tent's probably actually falling over. Yep. So
when people sort of call up and say my tent's leaking because I can see that water's sort of dripping on the inside of the fly, that's the first indication from my side of things to say actually it's highly unlikely to be leaking and sounds just like condensation. Yep. Whereas if they're talking about the seams or other points there, that's a bit different. But if you're talking about just the inside of the fly,
seams and points can be quite, it's obvious it's a specific point and there's water dripping in from a specific point that's letting water through. But if it's a kind of sheet of moisture on the inside of the fly, then it's probably condensation. Yeah. Now this issue's more of an issue on single skin tents, and by single skin we mean it has, like, the fly is also the inner, so the waterproof element of the tent is the fabric that you're sleeping against. Dual skin tents kind of get around it a bit because you've got this dry mesh or nylon inner, and then there's a gap before the flies on the outside of that, and that's preferable because you can have a bit of condensation build up on that fly and it doesn't affect you inside the tent if the tent's pitched properly.
Because one of the main reasons why condensation occurs is the the large variance in internal and external temperatures, outside and inside temperatures. So if you have that fly on or if you have double layer, it sort of gives you a little buffer in between the inner and the outer where that sort of warms up a bit and it's sort of like a medium temperature.
Yeah, I guess I never thought of it quite like that. I thought you said you didn't know anything about this.
Well, that's about it. Okay, I'm out now. I'm tapping out of this conversation. I'm done.
But I guess it would create a little bit of temperature drop between the very inside of the tent and the outside because the physics, and you can't get away from the physics of condensation. You can't buy a tent that doesn't have condensation.
Okay.
It will have condensation because of the difference between the inside of the tent with 1, 2, in the case of a family tent, maybe 4 or 6 people sleeping inside, all breathing out moist, warm air. And I think the average person can breathe that anywhere from like the stat we had in front of us was 250 up to 2 litres of water per day just from the moisture coming out of your air. So
which is insane.
It's a lot, right? Yeah. It makes you think, I need to drink more if I'm just breathing that much out. It's not just sweat, it's what I'm breathing out.
Yeah.
So say you've got 4 people in the tent for 8 hours, all breathing out that much. That water, that air, moisture is going into the air inside the tent, right? And it's a cold night, and we should stipulate that this is an issue on cold nights. Usually summer, warm nights, you don't have the issue because the difference between the inside of the tent and the outside of the tent is the same, or it's actually warmer on the outside of the tent possibly.
Yeah.
Issues on a cold winter night when all these people are warming up this little thing, sort of dome inside the tent, and on the outside it's much colder. At that point where that warm air meets the cold outside air is where that moisture in the air will condense, and that's where it turns into condensation. And that's what people experience most of the time. And there's a counterintuitive element to this because when you're camping on a cold night, you tend to do up all the doors and windows and vents and everything on your tent because you think I'm going to trap trap the warm air in the tent to stay warm.
And you've got like warmer sleeping bags and everyone's getting real warm.
That's right.
Yeah.
Which I guess sounds good in theory.
Yeah.
But you're increasing the chance of condensation. So you actually need to the only way to stop that condensation, there's no magic fabric to stop that unless some single skin tents have kind of like a fluffy kind of inner to it that kind of soak it up a little bit. Like a micro suede
sort of type thing going on?
They're usually like a Gore-Tex or one of those proprietary type materials that breathe, and they kind of soak it up and then it passes to the outside where it evaporates. But it's not that simple either in that respect. But most tents just they're synthetic, right? So the water beads up, and if enough water beads up, it starts to run down the inside of the tent. And if there's any points on that fly inside where it hits a pole or something, that can then turn into a drip that goes onto the inner tent, and that can come inside the tent as well. So the first step is to make sure you've got your tent set up tautly. So the fly and everything's nice and tight. So most of that water will run down the inside of the tent.
Just onto the ground.
Onto the ground on the outside.
Yeah.
The second thing is and this is the counterintuitive element, is to increase the ventilation of the tent. So you need to let cold air inside the tent to allow airflow through the tent so that warm air can escape and not turn into condensation.
Okay.
And that's kind of where it's funny. You've got to cool the tent down to stop condensation.
So I think a lot of tents will have like along the floor, they'll have like a small crescent moon or half circle type window right down the floor. Would that would be enough, wouldn't it? Just to, do you reckon? Or would you need a secondary point so there's active circulation, or would it be enough to just unzip something like that?
It's certainly going to help because there's, I guess, hot air rises. So that warm air is going to be coming to the top of the tent. Okay. So if you've got something down low open and something up high open, then you're kind of allowing the airflow to come in and move that warm air out of the tent, or that moist air out of the tent. So one vent's better than none, but I would say probably a vent in the top's a better solution, which is why most tents, especially hiking tents and stuff, will have a little vent in the top to allow that to escape. Same with gazebos and that sort of thing. They've all got vents in the top to allow that hot air to escape.
Okay.
So you need to do that to get that moisture out. Now, most people might say, no, I'll just deal with the moisture in the tent and I'll zip it all up. But then what you're then creating is a moist environment inside the tent, right? Yeah. And a moist environment's a cold environment.
Yeah.
So you're actually better off having a dry but slightly cooler environment inside the tent and using nice warm sleeping gear. So you're going to have cool air against your face. But the rest of it's going to be warm. I like that though.
Sometimes I find like I sleep a lot better when the air's crisper and colder, for sure.
Yeah, there's nothing quite like waking up in the morning to crisper air. I like it when I'm quite a fan of not even sleeping in a tent.
Yep.
And I quite look forward to that moment in the morning when you wake up and you're warm inside and you've got your nose is a little bit cold and that cool air against your face. I really like that.
Me too.
My wife, on the other hand,
not a fan.
If she was out doing that, she'd be inside her sleeping bag, because she just likes to be warm. So but not everyone likes that. But you're best getting that moisture to escape the tent, that warm air to escape the tent and stay warm inside your sleeping bag and have good gear to sleep in. So that's a better solution.
Okay.
What else can we cover off? I'm just thinking condensation will still happen. So if you're setting up your tent and taking it down and it's cold environment, then you're probably still going to get condensation even if you've got ventilation. So you need to then be wary about when you pack your tent up, that fly is going to be moist. So it might be best to pack that fly separately and your inner separately so the inner stays dry. So when you set it up again that night, you've got your dry inner and then you can put the fly over after so the moisture's not on the inner tent, because if the inner tent gets wet, then that's right against where you're sleeping. So you want to try and keep that moisture away from where you're sleeping.
You mentioned before about how if the premise is that ultimately and ideally you want the condensation to be able to sort of run down the fly and onto the ground, and if it's like touching your tent poles or any point of your inner, that's going to wick through.
Yep.
So setting up your tent fly properly, making sure it's all tensioned well and it's all like smooth and there's no sag points and things like that is important. And a lot of I think feedback from customers as well is that most people don't actually fully set their tent up with all guy rope points and stuff pegged out because, maybe if it's not windy or the weather's not as great, they think, the weather's sort of fine. They're like, I'll just peg out in my minimal 4-corner bits and whatever, and that's fine. But a lot of tents actually do have additional guy rope points. So that making sure all of those are properly pegged out and your fly being really well tensioned is really important.
Absolutely. A good quality tent is designed with all of that considered.
Yep. There
are some tents that are probably designed more for 2, maybe 3 season use, but probably more 2 season use so it's for warmer environments, I suppose. And they're not really designed for really cold or really wet environments. And the tent outer sometimes doesn't quite separate from the inner as much as it should, and that can create a few hassles on really cold nights. But a good quality, particularly when you come down to hiking tents like we've got in front of us here, they are designed with that, supposed to have that gap between the inner and the outer, and like you say, all of those peg points, which I think we're all guilty of just shortcutting and leaving a few out at any given time. But if it is a really cold night, then pegging that and just checking the tent and making sure that the fly isn't touching the inner is going to help you on those cold nights.
And some tents, like I know, for example, you're talking about single skin, Oztent RV RX series, they're single skin. And there's like in my experience, there's a lot of feedback from customers thinking, they're leaking, but they're definitely not like those sort of tents that tend to be a bit more notorious for condensation issues because they are single skin. And that's why you can buy as an optional accessory things like flies. And for majority of people, like having that additional fly in your kit for times when condensation is an issue makes all the difference.
Yep, I can talk from experience here too. And when I got my Oztent, the first thing I did was camp out on a cold night without a fly because I wanted to see what happened.
Yeah.
And it's single skin, so surely enough, I think I even zipped up all the vents and everything because my family's just got to deal with my infield tests here. And sure enough, the water stayed still during the night, but as soon as you start moving around in the morning, it starts dripping down and it hits the bar across the back and it was dripping on our head. So there's water inside the tent. Yeah. There was definitely condensation.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I did an in-between test with vents open and then put a fly on, but the difference between the tent, single skin Oztent RV, which can be applied to any tent.
Yep.
All zipped up, 4 people inside sleeping overnight is wet inside the next morning versus putting a fly over the top. And for the Oztent RV, it's not even a fly that covers the entire tent. It's just a cap over the top to try and reduce, like we mentioned before, the differential between the outer temperature and the inner.
Yep.
that made a huge difference. It didn't reduce all the condensation inside the tent. If you woke up in the morning and wiped your hand on the fabric inside, you'd get a wet hand. You
still get a wet hand, yeah.
It wasn't so much that it was dripping down the tent. It was just a little bit of moisture. And these are on particularly cold nights. It was I think we were camped in a marine sort of spot, so near the ocean. But it made a huge difference. So or the fly just stays attached to my Oztent RV now. So
that's awesome.
If it's a single skin tent, then the best thing you can do is add a fly to it.
Yeah.
If you've got a single skin tent, you don't have a fly, then I guess you can try and get around it by maybe putting a tarp over the top or something like that, just to try and reduce that differential. But you can't. The bottom line is you can't get away from condensation in a tent. It's physics.
Yeah.
We can't defy the laws of physics.
That's right.
The moisture is going to build up in a moist environment because the moisture in your breath, warm tent, cold on the outside is going to condense at that point where that changes. You can't get away from that.
Can't get away, yeah. It is what it is. So it's learning how to manage that to reduce its impact on your trip and how happy it makes you.
We've got just a chucks in front of us here, but a chucks or a microfibre towel is a great thing to have, so you can just give it a quick wipe each morning or before you move around too much inside the tent. Just wipe anything inside to get rid of the moisture.
Yeah.
But it's part of having a single skin tent. There are some benefits to a single skin tent. Well, there's a lot of benefits really in that it's much quicker to set up. The Oztent RV is really simple to set up. It's a heavy tent, but it's really simple to set up. From a hiking tent point of view, they're lighter weight because you haven't got that dual layer of fabric. So there's a lot of benefits, but there's always some caveats that come with that. And in the instance of a single skin tent, is condensation.
I think the other thing about the single skin tents, they tend to be the canvas options, like the Dutchy Tour tents and things like that, which I love. They're such an underrated tent, I reckon. That just single uphold. I know they're amazing. But is that the canvas breathes, being like that natural cotton, whatever. As soon as the sun gets on it though, it warms up and it will sort of dry out quite quickly, and it's not as much of a big deal. But I think some of the more synthetic based tents possibly will take a little bit longer into the day to sort of evaporate all of that out properly.
Got to make sure you got the vents open to try and give that moisture somewhere to escape.
Yeah.
The canvas does breathe better. And this we touch on the old style canvas too, where we talk about dripping leaks, where canvas before the coatings were applied to it, like the canvas that are used on a lot of the tents we have nowadays have some sort of a coating, usually a polyurethane coating or something on the inside, one or two coatings. Yeah. And that's what ideally creates that waterproof barrier, but it also reduces breathability. So the canvas we have nowadays is more breathable, more waterproof, but not as breathable as an old canvas which didn't have that coating. And the old canvas used to say waterproof, but if you touched it, you create this leak point because it doesn't have that barrier. So we don't really have that nowadays. And I tried to clarify with a few sort of experts around PU coated fabrics. If you touch it, will it leak? And sort of length of exposure of those fabrics to water versus will it eventually leak through. I'm still pulling information together on that, and we'll talk a bit more about it when we go into Waterhead ratings, I think. But as a general rule, PU coated fabrics, if you touch the inside, don't leak from rain on the outside. Yeah. Could be a different story if you've been caught out in heavy rain for a week, because eventually it does wet out. But if it's just been a rain overnight and you've touched the tent, you think, I touched it, now it's leaking. Once again, it's probably condensation, not because you've touched the tent. Yeah. Yeah. I think also on this as well, a lot of people will call up and be like, will this stretcher fit inside this tent, or will this mattress fit inside this tent, whatever. And I think really importantly is making sure that your stretcher or your mattress or the things that you have inside your tent aren't creating pressure on the tent inner, which is pushing it into the fly, because that creates wicking points and things like that. So a lot of people are like, I'll jam my stretcher in, and if it's pushing on the inner, that's fine. At least it fits, whatever. But that can often create that wicking point. It can do, It also create, if you've got that thin layer of sort of moisture on the inside, if you've got something pushing against it, that can then create a point that starts a drip. So don't have your gear against the edge. And we talk about moisture coming out of your breath overnight. Don't store wet gear inside the tent either, because if you've got your wet boots or a wet towel or something inside the tent, you're creating a moist environment that's slowly evaporating. That moisture is also going to the air inside the tent, and it's just creating more moisture that's got to go somewhere, which is usually the inside of your fly sheet. So, okay. That's also a really good point. Have I licened up the subject of condensation for you.
Yeah,
I think
I got into it.
You did, yeah.
I did get into it. I wasn't expecting to. But yeah, no, I definitely got into it. And I think I knew more about it than I thought I did.
Surprised yourself.
Surprised myself.
I think the bottom line is you can't get away from it, but you can mitigate or manage or minimize the impact that condensation will have. So yeah, we have got a blog article on this that
you wrote.
I wrote.
I think I already mentioned that, but I'll mention it again.
And we should double check to make sure everything we've said here now lines up with what's
the
in the
blog
article
post,
because
absolutely.
we do update things as we go and we get more information. And I think we will definitely have more information on waterheads and those sort of things in the future because it is a confusing thing around waterproof
I think we've had a couple of requests on it as well to talk more about waterhead ratings and what they mean.
It's not a black
like
and white science, is it? There's a few, you've got this, but you just need to consider these things and your tent's not always leaking just because there's moisture on the inside. But check out the article. We'll put it in the show notes under this episode. If you've got any feedback or any questions on condensation, jump on our Facebook group, the Snowy's Camping Show Facebook group. Laura and I will be on there as much as we can to answer your questions, give you feedback. If we can't answer it, we'll see if we can find an expert who can. What else have we got? Subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Wherever you also your podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Aggregator. You don't like me using that word,
I hate that word, mate. Just use wherever you listen to your podcasts. And snowies.com.au as well for all of your camping needs. And I think that's about it. Oh, yeah. No, that's it.
That's it.
I had a thought in my brain, but it wasn't relevant.
We'll ask one question though. What's your favourite thing about cold weather camping? Because I don't like it, but I want to know what you like about cold weather camping.
Are you with me or are you with Ben?
See you guys.
See ya.